Emily had always been fascinated by old houses. When she and her husband Mark bought the century-old Victorian home on Elm Street, she was thrilled. The house was beautiful, with its high ceilings, intricate woodwork, and a history that spanned generations. The neighbors told them that the house had once belonged to a wealthy family who had mysteriously vanished in the 1920s, but Emily brushed off the stories as mere local folklore. The first few weeks in the house were uneventful, filled with the excitement of moving in and decorating. But as they began to settle in, Emily noticed something strange. Late at night, when the house was quiet, she started hearing faint whispers. At first, she thought it was the wind, but the whispers seemed too distinct, too human. They were soft, barely audible, but always there, just on the edge of her hearing. One night, unable to sleep, Emily decided to explore the house. She wandered through the dark hallways, guided only by the light of a single candle. The whispers seemed to follow her, growing louder as she approached the attic. The door to the attic was old and heavy, creaking ominously as she pushed it open. The attic was filled with dust and cobwebs, the remnants of a life long forgotten. In the far corner, she noticed an old wooden trunk, its lid slightly ajar. The whispers grew louder as she approached it, now clearly coming from within the walls. Her heart pounded in her chest as she knelt down and opened the trunk. Inside, she found old photographs, letters, and a small, worn diary. The letters were brittle with age, filled with desperate pleas for help, written by someone named Elizabeth. The diary belonged to her as well. Emily's hands trembled as she opened it to the first page. The diary told a story of a young woman, Elizabeth, who had lived in the house nearly a century ago. She wrote of strange occurrences, of whispers in the walls and shadowy figures that moved through the house at night. She described how her family had slowly descended into madness, driven to the brink by the relentless voices that tormented them. The last entry was smeared with ink, as if written in a state of panic. "They're in the walls. They're watching. We can't escape." As Emily read, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. She could feel the air in the attic growing colder, the shadows lengthening around her. She slammed the diary shut and backed away, her breath coming in short, terrified gasps. But as she turned to leave, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The walls of the attic were moving. The wallpaper bulged and rippled as if something, or someone, was trapped behind it. The whispers turned into anguished cries, echoing through the attic, surrounding her. In a panic, Emily stumbled down the stairs, but the cries followed her, reverberating through the house. The walls seemed to pulse with life, shadows darting just out of sight. She ran to the bedroom where Mark was sleeping, shaking him awake, but he didn't stir. His body was cold, his eyes open but lifeless, his face twisted in a silent scream. Emily screamed, but no sound came out. The whispers grew deafening, drowning out everything else. She could feel something cold wrapping around her, pulling her back towards the attic. The last thing she saw was the wallpaper peeling away, revealing the faces of those trapped within, twisted, tormented souls reaching out, their mouths open in eternal screams. The next morning, the house on Elm Street was quiet once again. The neighbors noticed that the windows, once filled with light, were dark, the curtains drawn. Emily and Mark were never seen again, and the house was eventually abandoned, left to decay. But those who pass by say they can still hear the whispers, faint but persistent, echoing through the walls. And on some nights, if you stand close enough, you might see the shadows of those who are forever trapped within, their voices calling out, begging for release. But beware, those who listen too closely may find themselves joining the chorus of the damned. Megan had always loved collecting antiques. There was something fascinating about owning objects with history, something that had seen generations pass by. So, when she stumbled upon a beautiful, ornate mirror at a local flea market, she couldn't resist. The vendor was eager to sell it, almost too eager, and let it go for a price that was surprisingly low. The mirror was large, with an intricately carved wooden frame that looked like it belonged in a mansion. Megan hung it in her bedroom, admiring how it reflected the room, making it look larger, more elegant. But it didn't take long before she began to notice something strange. Every morning, Megan would wake up feeling uneasy, as if she had been watched all night. The mirror, which had seemed so beautiful, now gave her an odd feeling, a sense of dread that she couldn't shake. At first, she dismissed it as her imagination, but the feeling persisted. One evening, after a particularly long day, Megan was brushing her hair in front of the mirror when she noticed something unusual. The reflection didn't quite match the room. It was almost imperceptible, but the objects in the reflection were slightly out of place. Her bed was closer to the window. The chair was on the wrong side of the room. She blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks on her, but when she looked again, the reflection was normal. As days passed, the oddities became more pronounced. Sometimes, Megan would catch glimpses of movement in the mirror, but when she turned around, nothing was there. At night, she started hearing faint whispers, like a distant conversation that she couldn't quite make out. The whispers seemed to come from the mirror, growing louder the longer she listened. One night, unable to sleep, Megan got up and stood in front of the mirror. The room was dark, but the mirror seemed to glow faintly, as if it had its own light source. Staring into it, Megan saw her reflection, but there was something wrong. Her reflection wasn't mimicking her movements. It stood still, watching her with a sinister smile that she hadn't made. Frozen in fear, Megan watched as her reflection began to move on its own. It raised a hand and beckoned her closer, its smile widening, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too long. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, filling her head with thoughts that weren't her own. She felt drawn to the mirror, an invisible force pulling her closer. As she reached out to touch the glass, her reflection's eyes darkened, becoming voids of endless black. Megan's fingers brushed the surface of the mirror, and suddenly, she felt herself being pulled in. The glass was no longer solid. It was cold, like liquid, and it began to swallow her hand, then her arm. Panic set in as she tried to pull away, but it was too late. The mirror consumed her, dragging her into a cold, dark void. The last thing she saw was her own reflection, grinning wickedly, before everything went black. The next morning, Megan's friend Claire came over to check on her. She found the house eerily silent, the front door unlocked. Megan was nowhere to be found. The only thing out of place was the mirror in her bedroom. Claire noticed it immediately. It seemed darker, the wood more aged and cracked. But what really caught her attention was the reflection. In the mirror, Claire saw Megan's room, but it wasn't empty. Standing in the corner was a figure, pale, with wide, terror-filled eyes, reaching out, as if trying to escape. Claire blinked, and the figure was gone, but the mirror's surface remained disturbingly cold. The mirror now hangs in an antique shop downtown, waiting for its next owner. But be warned, those who stare into it too long might find themselves lost, trapped in a world where reflections don't just imitate, they replace. When James first moved into the old, creaky house at the end of Willow Lane, he thought he'd found a great deal. The rent was low, the neighborhood was quiet, and the landlord was eager to have a new tenant. But there was something about the place that felt off. It started small. James would hear faint footsteps at night, thinking it was just the house settling. But soon, the sounds became more distinct. It was as if someone was pacing the halls, their steps slow and deliberate. The feeling of being watched became constant, but whenever he turned around, nothing was there. One night, after a long day at work, James collapsed on the couch. The TV flickered on by itself, displaying static. Annoyed, he grabbed the remote and turned it off, but the static returned, louder this time. As he reached for the remote again, the static abruptly stopped, replaced by a grainy image of a room. James' heart skipped a beat when he realized it was his living room, his exact living room, as seen from the corner near the ceiling. He scrambled to find the source, searching for a hidden camera, but found nothing. The image on the TV remained, showing him searching the room. Panic set in. He unplugged the TV, but the screen didn't go black. Instead, it zoomed in on a shadowy figure standing behind him. Cold fear gripped him as he slowly turned around. Nothing. The room was empty. Shaking, James grabbed his phone to call the police, but it wouldn't turn on. The lights in the house flickered and then went out, plunging him into darkness. He could hear the footsteps again, this time getting closer, accompanied by a soft whispering that seemed to come from every direction. "Get out," the voice hissed. James bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. In his panic, he ran upstairs, but the air grew colder with each step, his breath visible in the dark. The whispering turned into anguished wails as he reached his bedroom. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind him. The temperature plummeted, and James could see his breath condensing into frost on the window. The wails turned into screams of terror and pain. In the dim light, James could see a shadow moving across the room, coming closer, taking form. The figure was tall, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to swallow the light. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, emitting a bone-chilling scream that shook the walls. James tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing he saw was the figure lunging towards him, its cold, dead hands reaching for his throat. The next day, the landlord arrived to check on James after he hadn't answered any calls. He found the house empty, the front door wide open. There was no sign of James, no indication he had ever been there, except for a single message scrawled in frost on the bedroom window: "Never alone." To this day, no one knows what happened to James. The house remains vacant, its reputation growing darker with each passing year. And those who dare to step inside say they can still hear the footsteps at night and a soft whisper that sends chills down their spine. Get out.